Morphy's prodigious activity as a child was not only limited to chess. In fact, he had an incredible memory and was proficient in many different languages. For instance, did you know he was fluent in French, Spanish and German as well as English? And this made him able to absorb all the chess literature of the day. This in turn made him an even more formidable opponent. Now, my next game is another striking example of Morphy's ability. It comes from a tournament played in Mobile, Alabama in 1855 between Judge Alexander Meek playing white with Morphy black. And again we see this tendency towards gambit openings at that time, with Meek employing first the Scotch game and then the Scotch gambit with bishop c4. These days the Scotch gambit is regarded as a veritable antique, and of course Morphy, ever alert to the necessity for quick development, preferred bishop c5. Well, we know in 2015 that probably c3 is White's best chance to make something of this opening. But back then, they liked swashbuckling attacking play, and Meek moves in with the immediate knight g5, which sets traps, is tricky to meet, but Morphy instinctively goes towards the right move, and he played knight to h6. Counterintuitive in the sense that it develops a knight to the side, but again Morphy is very alert to all the traps in the position, and he understands that it's necessary to get his pieces out and get castled. And he even tempts White into executing a so-called trap in the position, but an idea which doesn't really work out very well for White at all. Now, if we just drop back just to show you how tricky this opening is, let's say Black plays knight e5. Well, here we see a similar combination to the game coming up, with White going knight takes f7. And this is the trap in the position that Black should probably avoid here. The main point being that after Queen takes c5, Black's development is somewhat retarded, and there's a big target on d4. So White's got the advantage here. The difference between Morphy's move and the variation just shown is that yes, White can play knight takes f7 here, but when he goes through with the same combination, we find that actually Black is in a much better position to resist White's attack. He's got an extra piece developed, and he's ready with the move d6, attacking the White Queen and sending her on her way. And just to show you that there is another move in this position, d5 is also possible. The very sharp point being that after pawn takes pawn, Black goes rook e8 check, and after king f1, the splendid move b6. And White gets overwhelmed, simply overwhelmed, by the fantastic Black development. White has to play c4, Black captures en passant check, and then plays the rook down to the back rank with checkmate. So going back to knight to h6, this is actually quite an interesting position. And we wonder whether White can improve this variation by going queen to h5. Again, this sets a very dirty little trap in this position, as if Black plays knight e5, White has the splendid move here, knight to e6. And after d takes e6, queen takes e5, bishop f8, White goes bishop takes h6. Luckily for Black, and going back once more, after queen h5, Black can play queen to e7 with a good position, and I've no doubt that was Morphy's intention. The White pieces look threatening, but in reality they're actually in vulnerable situations, and they are getting ready to be pushed Black by the active Black pieces. Well, Meek could not resist it in the game. He goes in for knight takes f7, and so we get this combination, but I don't like it at all for White. His queen gets kicked around, Morphy's development is superior, and he gets to play his rook to the middle straight away. And White's next move shows the naivety of the day, because any modern player would recognise that White's in a difficult situation here. He simply has to castle. I mean, that is it. You have to take your chances in this position. Okay, Black has a better game, but never mind, white can maybe survive. In the game itself, Meek played queen to b3 check, and after d5 he immediately starts to regret this check because it's of no consequence whatsoever. It doesn't help his position. It merely frees up black's game even more than it was already free. And again, black really is forcing white to castle. White simply has to castle in this position. But Meek stubbornly plays on with f3, not a good move at all. And Morphy continues his harassing of the white queen with knight to a5. Meek played queen to d3, and now d takes e4. F takes e4, queen h4 check. And in these last couple of moves, we simply see Morphy's talent at work. He understood and he taught us that when you are ahead in development, you must open up the game to get the attack. If you don't attack at the right moment when you are ahead in development, then your advantage will evaporate, the opponent will catch up, all the attack will be gone. But in this case, poor Judge Meek is going to be rubbed out by the active black pieces. No way was Morphy going to exchange the queens. He just leaves white with 4 inactive pieces on the back rank. Will Meek tries to get one of them into the game with knight to d2. Morphy continues his harassment campaign with rook e3. And white's queen is loath to leave the protection of the square e2, so she plays up to b5, whereupon Morphy gains another free move here with c6. And the point of this is that white can't take the knight. Allowing the rook to come into e2 check is simply fatal, and white is completely lost in this position. If he comes forward, he gets mated. If he goes backwards, he comes into impossible difficulties after a couple of queen checks. And finally, if he goes to f1, rook check, king g2, queen e2 is also mate. Simple variations when we see them today, but at the time it required a lot of understanding to get to positions like this. So poor Judge Meek has got to go back to the game itself, retreat to f1, and now another superb move, bishop to h3. Again, decoying the white queen away from e2 and thereby creating a completely overwhelming attack. So Meek played queen d1 to still keep contact with f2 to e2, and now rook f8. The last piece joins the attack. Compare black's active forces with white's undeveloped position, and after knight f3, the simple king e8 was enough to finish the game. The knight on f3 is terminally pinned. White loses, and in fact Meek decided to resign. So splendid stuff from Morphy, and a lesson for all of us about how to handle a position where you've got better development.